What is up, guys? Rick Kakis here, and today we're testing out the Gjallarhorn exotic rocket launcher in the King's Fall raid. Now, the reason I'm making this video is simply because I was curious about this. I know other people must have been feeling what I was feeling when I was playing King's Fall, and that was, I wonder how good the Gjallarhorn would be in this raid. Well, now, because the Gjallarhorn was brought back with the Rise of Iron expansion and we have access to this beauty again, I wanted to try it out and see how good it would be in the King's Fall raid. Interestingly enough, I know some of you may be thinking, well, it's going to be amazing because you're over-leveled. However, the way the leveling system works within Destiny means that you can't really gain a huge advantage, in fact, not really any advantage, from being over-leveled compared to a certain enemy. That's why if you go into the Cosmodrome right now, even if you're 385 light, you won't be one-shotting all the enemies there, like with an auto rifle or something. You're going to kill them pretty much as easily as you're killing enemies in the Siva Heroic Strike playlist. And that's because in Destiny, again, the way the leveling system works is that once you get on par with the light level of a certain enemy, all of the benefits pretty much stop at that point, even if you go higher and higher and higher. So, what I'm trying to say is this: if Bungie ever raises the light level of King's Fall, ever makes it applicable again within the endgame, this video will be very useful because these numbers coming up in today's video are gonna remain the numbers if King's Fall is updated into the endgame, which is very interesting. Now, the other thing I did really want to say before getting into the nitty-gritty of this video is that, again, I mainly made this because I was curious. I just wanted to see how good the Galley would be in King's Fall. I didn't realize the task I had embarked on. This weapon, the Gjallarhorn, is incredibly complicated in calculating its damage. There are so many factors involved. Random numbers just appear that make no sense within the damage calculations. It is incredibly difficult to actually calculate the exact damage numbers. I'm pretty confident in my answers. They do, for the most part, make sense. However, again, this was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be. So if you do enjoy this video, please remember to also support it by rating and sharing. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. The Gjallarhorn versus the first boss in King's Fall, the Warpriest. Now, as I just said, calculating the actual damage of a Gjallarhorn shot is incredibly complicated because there is so much going on. Firstly, you have the initial impact damage and the initial explosion damage. Those are added together, and then you have, of course, all of the wolfpack rounds. There is around 22 wolfpack rounds, and they appear on screen as a massive jumble of numbers. Very, very difficult to count. Even if you slow it down by frame, it's incredibly difficult to account for all of these wolfpack rounds. However, myself counting them and doing research work by my peers, from people like Data, who also did videos on the Gjallarhorn, I was able to piece together that there is approximately 22 wolfpack rounds. And these wolfpack rounds are not just, simple wolfpack rounds. I can't just do a number times 22. I thought I would be able to, but actually there's two different kinds of wolfpack rounds. There seems to be around 7 wolfpack rounds doing high damage, so you'll have like 1,000 damage wolfpack rounds, and then there are 15 wolfpack rounds doing low damage, so those will do around 700 damage compared to the other wolfpack rounds doing 1,000. I'm not sure why this was done, but if you look at the numbers, that is what pops up. Now, very importantly, the math was kept constant throughout all of the different encounters. So even if I'm just a little bit wrong and there's actually 23 wolfpack rounds and I'm 1,000 damage off, I'm gonna be 1,000 damage off for all of these calculations, which is really good because the ratios and comparing which encounters are better for the Gjallarhorn is still gonna be exactly the same. So again, the math was consistent, the same ratios, the same numbers of wolfpack rounds were utilized for every different calculation. So, with all of that stuff out of the way, all the scientific stuff out of the way, let's get down to the actual damage. For the Warpriest, a non-tethered shot did an initial impact of 5,026, combined with the explosion damage of 15,969. That's added with the low damage wolfpacks of 15 of them, each doing 739 damage, and the high damage wolfpacks, 7 of those, doing 1,035 damage each. These all add together for a total of 39,325 damage for a single non-tether, no other effects shot of the Gjallarhorn on the Warpriest. Now I went on after that to calculate a Gjallarhorn shot with the tether. And this was really done to ensure that my numbers were correct. If I got a big inconsistency between these two calculations, I would know that I'm wrong on a certain aspect. But just to relay a little bit of that information to you guys, turns out tether adds about 25% extra damage, and we see that basically perfectly calculated. Initial impact was 6,283, and if you actually take the initial impact of the non-tether round, which was 5,026, times it by 1.25, so 25% extra, you will get 6,282.5. So that perfectly adds up. Tether adds 25%. There you go. There was a little bit of inconsistency and a little bit of weird rounding with other numbers that came up, but pretty much everything was about 25% more damage than without the tether. The one inconsistency was the explosion damage was a little bit more, like 26 or 27% extra. Not sure why that was. But in any event, you add in low damage, high damage wolfpack rounds, and you come to a total of 49,157 damage with the tether involved. So nearly 50,000 damage with a single Gjallarhorn shot with tether. That is a pretty damn good amount of damage. Now, because we went into the nitty-gritty of where these numbers are coming from, for the future encounters, we're just going to be talking about the total numbers mainly, and not going over each wolfpack round damage. So, my overall assessment of the Gjallarhorn versus the Warpriest, I thought it was pretty darn good. Probably around a 7 or 8 out of 10 if I had to rank it between all different weapons. I was kind of surprised my entire team using Gjallarhorns, well, a lot of Gjallarhorn rounds. I don't think I had max ammo, but I was pretty close. We didn't take him down in a single round. I was kind of surprised by that. And in fact, using black spindles, if we all had black spindles, we probably would have killed him in that single round. So we did have to go to another round. With that being said, I think there was some inconsistencies with the ammo count, and he was nearly dead in that second round anyways. So very effective, not the most effective I've ever seen, but still very effective. And you know, the Gjallarhorn is just so easy to use, and it's so effective against other adds in that encounter, much more effective than something like the black spindles, so you have to give it points there as well. Now let's move on to the Golgoroth encounter. And let's just say there's a reason people don't utilize rocket launchers in this encounter beyond the fact that you have a really high chance to kill yourself. Now, when I took the Gjallarhorn versus Golgoroth, shot him in the crit, there's a lot of weirdness that popped up. Essentially, for the low damage wolfpack rounds, you have 750 popping up a ton. That was like the lower tier damage. But then you had a ton of 2,279 damage. It seems like there was actual different damage for certain wolfpack rounds that would just hit him on the outside, and then certain wolfpack rounds that would actually hit his stomach, which was that really important critical. So you have a really weird damage calculation. It's going to be a little bit different every time depending on just kind of where the wolfpack rounds go. You basically have an upper and lower point. Because depending on how many of those wolfpack rounds hit his stomach crit, you're going to do anywhere from about 35,000 damage to about 58,000 damage. Now, that is a pretty big gap, 35,000 to 58,000. The real number that you're probably going to get is going to lie somewhere in the middle, because some of your wolfpack rounds will hit that crit, some won't. So I expect most of the time going to be in between those two numbers, around 45,000. However, you can really see that, again, the upper echelon, if all of those wolfpack rounds are hitting that crit, it's around 60,000 damage. But I switch over to my sniper in this clip, and you can see it does 124,000 damage. It does double of what the upper echelon of what you can do with the Gjallarhorn actually does against Golgoroth. And by the way, this is the strike exclusive weapon that you get for beating Sepkus Perfected. It does the same damage, it's in the same damage category as the Black Spindle. So in total, Gjallarhorn versus Golgoroth, Gjallarhorn is not very good. I would rank it probably around a 4 or 5 out of 10. Absolutely excellent for taking down the adds in this encounter, especially if you're doing the one orb strat, which is by far the easiest strategy, so maybe equip it for that, but you're definitely going to want to switch to a sniper when you're actually damaging Golgoroth. Now moving on to the next encounter, we have the Daughters. This is actually a really interesting result in this test. The Gjallarhorn is actually incredibly effective against the Daughters. We absolutely melted them with Gjallarhorns. It was incredible. I've never seen the Daughters killed so fast. Even when using stuff like the Touch of Malice, it's not even close to the Gjallarhorn. Now that's because the damage of a non-tether round, I took this from a single shot against the second Daughter, you're doing 48,513 damage for a single shot. Now that is almost as much as the Warpriest with a tether. So for whatever reason, you're doing massive damage to these Daughters. Again, that's without a tether. With a tether, you're adding an additional 25% to what is 25% added basically to the Warpriest initial damage. Like, you're getting a big bonus for whatever reason for damage against the Daughters. And this, I really wanted to talk about the oddities, like the random numbers that just appear, because as you can see here, there is a 15,000 damage bonus that just appears out of nowhere. On screen right now, you're seeing 15,000 damage. This is not initial impact. Initial impact was 6,200 damage. It has already been applied. The 24,000 damage number is actually the original 19,000 explosion damage number with an extra 25% caused by tether. That's why it's a critical, as you can see here. Guys, I have no idea where this 15,000 damage bonus even came from. It's not the initial impact, it's not any of the wolf packs, its math doesn't add up to anything. Like, it doesn't add up to anything. Now, there's a couple of different explanations for this. Perhaps it's just the game lagging a little bit, and it's adding a bunch of wolf pack rounds together and making this big number. Perhaps it's quite literally just an incorrect number that accidentally popped up and it doesn't mean anything. Or perhaps you're getting a random 15,000 damage bonus against the Daughters. That 15,000 was not used in this calculation because it popped up some rounds, didn't pop up other rounds, like didn't pop up in the non-tether shot that I calculated. But just something to be aware of, 15,000 extra damage might randomly pop up during the Daughters encounter. Like, again, that just lends to the fact of how crazy and how weird the Gjallarhorn is to calculate. Random numbers just pop up and then there's no explanation for them. But in any event, the Gjallarhorn versus the Daughters encounter, Gjallarhorn 10 out of 10. Just the most effective weapon you can use against these Daughters. If you're trying to get crits with something like a sniper, maybe your actual time to kill may be technically higher, but the Daughters are spazzing out and moving around and you often miss your critical shots with snipers. With the Gjallarhorn, there's no chance of doing that. You melt them so quickly. Now, moving on to the last encounter, Big Daddy Oryx. Now, first off, the Gjallarhorn was pretty darn effective against the Ogres. I think a lot of you would have guessed that already. But against Oryx himself, well, how much damage does the Gjallarhorn, the fabled ultimate weapon of destiny, do against Oryx? Basically nothing. It does 5,167 damage. The Wolfpack rounds didn't count. Like, they did not come up at all. So it does almost no damage against Oryx. Do not use the Gjallarhorn against Oryx. Use basically anything else. That was actually a really interesting result, and it'll make a lot more sense when we actually go over the Gjallarhorn versus the Shade, because a Gjallarhorn round versus the Shade of Oryx actually is a lot more effective than Oryx himself. Interestingly enough, the initial impact against the Shade was 5,100 167, and that's added on to the explosion damage of 16,412. Now, the reason I went into the details there is I'm sure you guys recognize those are the exact same numbers. The initial impact against the Shade of Oryx is the exact same damage you use when you hit Big Daddy Oryx in the chest. So there you have it. When you have a rocket launcher against Oryx, the initial impact is the only damage it does. It doesn't even count for the explosion damage. Therefore, rocket launchers, I would say as a whole, especially the Gjallarhorn, which it doesn't even count the wolfpack rounds, which are like the main reason to use the Gjallarhorn, is just not effective against Oryx. Do not use them against Oryx. Against the Shade, however, it did a lot more. In fact, the total calculation against the Shade of Oryx was 40,427 damage. So quite a lot more than the pitiful 5,000 against the actual Oryx. So, the last test, the Gjallarhorn versus the Oryx encounter. How does the Gjallarhorn rate? Well, there's a lot of moving parts in this encounter, and although the Gjallarhorn is complete shat against Oryx himself, it's pretty darn good against the Shade, except for the fact that you really want to make sure you shoot the Shade right after she's teleported and not like as she's standing there, because she teleports a lot of the times as you've just hit her, so you don't get those wolfpack rounds, or perhaps you miss her entirely. So just as long as you have your timing right with the Shade, the Gjallarhorn is very effective against it. But it's also good against the ogres, it's also good against the Light Eater Knights if you're doing hard mode, so it's good against everything in the encounter pretty much except for Oryx. So overall, probably a 7.5 out of 10 for this encounter. Now, how good is the Gjallarhorn exotic rocket launcher overall against the entirety of King's Fall? Well, overall, I would have to say that it's pretty darn effective. Although we didn't go over the non-boss encounters, like the door encounter just before the Warpriest, any encounter involving a lot of adds, having the Gjallarhorn is incredibly effective. You can take out the wayward wizards or the nosy knights whenever you want to and kill everything around them as well. Against the bosses, as we've gone over, certain weapons may be better. The Black Spindle's probably a little bit better against bosses, but the Black Spindle is a lot worse than the Gjallarhorn against adds, and you're gonna have to verse both. It's not just bosses, it's not just adds, so you want a weapon that can handle both of those things. However, would a legendary rocket launcher or would a super be just as effective against adds? Probably be pretty close to the Gjallarhorn. So all of those factors combined, I would say the Gjallarhorn overall against the King's Fall raid would be an 8 out of 10. Very, very effective, but not the best build out there. It would be something I recommend more and more as the level of experience of the player in question goes down and down. Now that's because it's just such an easy weapon to use. If you shoot a galley round at a bunch of adds, your team will thank you. If you shoot a galley round at a boss, it'll be pretty impressive and your team will thank you. It's just overall a good weapon to use. Again, there can be better weapons, but using something and being extremely accurate and mindful with something like the Black Spindle is a little bit more difficult. Additionally, you have pretty easy access to the Gjallarhorn. It's not that difficult of a quest to get it. If you guys want to get it, I've made a full guide for how to get every step of how to get the Gjallarhorn, so you can go ahead and follow that, and you have a pretty good weapon in this encounter. So guys, that's going to start to wrap up the video. If you guys want to see any other weapons versus King's Fall or versus the Wrath of the Machine raid, please leave it in the comment section down below. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video and found it informative, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you want to see more Destiny content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. Now, if you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter. That's linked in the description down below at RickCacus, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.